So welcome to Grow Social Capital's Social Capital Week 2021. My name is Russell Todd and he is
Andy Green.
We're directors and co-founding directors indeed of Grow Social Capital, and this is our primer that we're calling it, a short introduction to how to get started with social capital, subtitled Everything You Wanted to Know About Social Capital but Were Afraid to Ask. So what we're going to go through today is introduce ourselves, to a little bit more about who else is part of the team, talk through some of the origins of the term. Most people will be familiar with Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, a seminal 2000 text of his. Tends to be most people's entry point, but there are a couple of other entry points. We'll just dissect the different types of social capital, and then Andy's going to talk about the sense of this notion of unsocial capital, what it is, how perhaps we've been complicit in developing it and pushing it in our communities and our lives. And then we've got some main text and recommended reading that we will share with you as well. So this is us, as I said, this is Andy and myself. Contrasting backgrounds in many respects, but other people in the team are Matt Appleby, again, some other backgrounds in terms of PR, communications, and then also Sarah Tamsin, who does a lot of our sort of web and digital sort of presence and side of things. So that's the four of us. Our contact details will be at the end as well, if you wanted to get in touch. So yeah, so this is where we start. Bowling Alone. This is Robert Putnam, born in 1941, still going strong as well. Has been on a lot of sort of podcasts and in a lot of interviews and newspaper articles this last year, for obvious reasons. I suppose in terms of the pandemic, which we'll touch on as well. He's coined the term Bowling Alone. It was the title of his book, The Collapse and Revival of American Community. And it's essentially a metaphor for how atomized we've become in society and our lives. But what's the interesting thing is that Putnam, although he talks about something that's almost quintessentially American in terms of bowling, bowling alleys and things like that, a lot of Putnam's work on social capital was actually nurtured within looking at democracy and civil society in Italy, and a very kind of grassroots level. And he's applied some of that thinking to American society. He is an American. And one of the things that he identified, and it's coined this term Bowling Alone, is that despite bowling remaining that quintessential sport, still a very popular sport, participation rates remain very, very high. So it remained static in the late 20th century, and as much as they ever had for the rest of that century. The number of leagues, the number of clubs and teams participating in those was declining, and declining quite markedly. And so in the sense that we are bowling alone, for Putnam, it became a proxy for less togetherness, basically.
And really, I'd build upon that, Russell, and saying that moving on that a British example, where I live in Barry in South Wales, wouldn't be just bowling alone, but skittling no more, in the sense that skittle alleys were very much a fabric of people's lives. My dear father-in-law, late father-in-law and mother-in-law were both in skittles teams in Barry, and not only are people skittling less, but the actual alleys are not there anymore. So nearly probably about a third of the alleys, bowling alleys in pubs in Barry, have now disappeared. So not only are people not going along, but they've not got the facility, the community asset to take part and bring them together there. So we're witnessing a really major issue here, major challenge that underpins many of the issues our society faces. Moving on, Russell.
And I've only got to go around the corner to the Pineapple Pub where I live in my part of Cardiff. The pub is still there, but the skittle alley is no more, and it's been replaced by, well, nothing really. It's now a turning circle for the articulated lorries that supply a Lidl supermarket. And I think that is a metaphor that is quite powerful actually for a lot of how social infrastructure has been in our communities, has been replaced and lost by something a little bit more corporate, should we say. So origins of the term. Putnam himself is quick to credit this gentleman, Lyda Judson Hanifan, LJ Hanifan, who died in 1932. So it just goes to show quite how much longevity these concepts actually have. You'll need to get past the quote I'm going to show up in a moment, and it's slightly stuffy language. That's a little bit prim. There's a slight sort of gender bias in it as well, and perhaps in that respect, Hanifan is of his time. But there's a certain timeliness to what he's saying as well. Hanifan wasn't any straight-laced, stiff-collared clergyman or Puritan. He was actually quite a progressive reformer. He was a supervisor of the school boards and schools in rural West Virginia, and was very much committed to raising educational standards and literacy within rural folk in that part of the United States at the turn of the 20th century. And so what Hanifan says is that the tangible substances that count most in the daily lives of people, things like goodwill, fellowship, sympathy, and social intercourse among the individuals and families who make up a social unit, with the individual is helpless socially if left to himself. And I think this is the thing that real kind of clinches it for me. Bearing in mind he's writing in 1916, over a century ago, the community as a whole will benefit by the cooperation of all its parts, while the individual will find in his associations the advantages of the help, the sympathy, and the fellowship of his neighbours. And Putnam's quick to credit Hanifan with the concept, not just the term social capital, because much of what this quote encapsulates is core and central to some of Putnam's writings and the writings of others. I think what's remarkable, and Putnam comments on this himself, is that despite the certain perhaps resonance that this has at the moment, during the pandemic, Hanifan would have had the Spanish flu impacting on his society and his part of the world with just a couple of years after this was written. Putnam's queries and doesn't really know why, but these ideas sort of sank without a trace. There's very little reference to Hanifan for much of the rest of the 20th century. Bringing it a little bit more up to date and coming at it from a slightly different angle is the late great Pierre Boudoir, who died in 2002. Coming at this from French philosophical perspective, one won't be surprised to hear that there's some density to the language that he uses. He talks about the aggregates of social capital being the aggregate of the actual or potential resources linked to the possession of a durable network. And that durable is a key word here, I think, for me. It's strong. Resilient is a word we hear a lot in public policy. It doesn't need external programs. It doesn't need government patronage. It doesn't need lottery funding to sustain itself. These things can help, of course, and can add particular value and additional value to things, but the networks themselves are durable based on the relationships that are institutionalized within them. And even things like just mutual acquaintance and recognition, Boudoir sees those as valuable elements to social capital. That person you see a lot in the street, you may not know them by name, you may not only know them by first name. You don't know much about where they're from, perhaps, where they work, anything like that, but that mere acquaintance and recognition helps sort of incubate the familiarity and degrees of trust and levels of trust within these relationships, within these networks. And so for Bourdieu, social capital can be summarized as the integration within a network of social connections which can be mobilized for particular purposes. And again, I think this is something that for us at Grow Social Capital, and this is about as conceptual as dense as we're going to get today, is a lot of the talk around building new normals, building back better, leveling up, all of these possibly soundbitey things that politicians are often quick to come out with, actually have an inherent element of competition and battle within them in order to build that better, in order to create more fairer, just societies, in order to protect the environment and reverse the ecological harm that we're doing to the planet. We need to compete for some of the resources that are available, whether those are actual or potential resources available within communities. And we tend to be familiar with the term capital in a financial economic sense. And one of the things that Bourdieu was strong to point out is that in the same way that economic capital can be converted, it can take money forms, it can be in the form of shares, it can be in the form of annuities, it can take the form of buildings, so too can forms of social and cultural capital be changed. They can be transformed into economic value as well. And that's something I think we would have a little bit of time for. I think one of the things that he also recognised, Bourdieu, is that an economy is a system of cultural practice, cultural exchange, cultural relationships, as much as and as well as economic and financial exchanges. And for practice, for societies and social groups to be understood, and to recognise that they're engaged strategically in a continual competition for profit, both real and symbolic, is that there's that ongoing battle is and a competition, if you like, is something that's ongoing both now and for future generations. And this comes back to this thing around building back better. It doesn't just happen, it's something we're going to have to fight for. And social capital matters. Andy and I wrote an article for Planet last year and in which we identified that, we posited that social infrastructure would be something that we would need to be investing in as a society, to help repair some of the damage caused by the pandemic. And we drew on the experience of Chicago in the mid-90s, which suffered a devastating, deadly heat wave, in which research afterwards identified that areas very demographically similar, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of socioeconomic metrics, some of them side by side suffered really quite contrasting mortality rates due to that heat wave. And one of the findings after that was that the strength of networks and ties and connections, the visibility of people, this thing that Baudouin calls the mutual sort of acquaintances, the strength of that was a factor in helping people survive that heat wave. Heat wave is slightly different to an airborne pandemic. We recognised at the time in the article. What's fascinating to see is that even in just the last couple of weeks, the Washington Post was talking about research that has identified social factors inoculating some communities against coronavirus, and they sense that a measure of the networks, norms, trust, these words that keep cropping up in this short primer, the extent to which they are strong and robust and present within communities has helped suppress the spread of coronavirus. So Putnam talked about two forms of social capital, primarily bridging and bonding. And since he wrote Bowling Alone, there's been a slight sort of third one linking, which if you were to kind of Venn diagram these, sort of sits in the middle a little bit, overlapping the two. So what do we mean by these? I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but there's the general distinction is that bonding social capital are those ties, those norms, those networks that occur within groups who are very similar, who are homogenous, the same. Whereas bridging social capital is the strength of the ties and networks between groups that might be quite different and contrasting in ethnicity, in faith, in age, gender, etc. The tendency that the bonding social capital, the groups that have strong bonding social capital tend to be a little bit exclusive. They can be a little bit inward looking. They invest a lot of time, they value a lot of time on the things that they have in common. We're not saying that one is better than the other, one is good, one is bad. And you can point to a couple of examples where strong bonding social capital actually is a virtue and has been advantageous in certain circumstances, and that actually bridging social capital hasn't been particularly put to good use. But there is a sense that within those groups of people who are alike, there's very sort of strong ties, even if you do not know somebody horizontally within those groups, because of the investment and the focus and the attention on what is similar about us. There is a sense that you will know and have a greater level of trust with somebody who is a bit more like you, in the sense that it is horizontal. And as I said, there's some other distinctions. Linking capital tends to be a kind of a mix of the two, but tends to exist within institutional settings. And we'll be hearing from Jamie Grundy a bit later this week about the extent to which that is very much a feature of prison life, a very, very tightly regulated, disciplined, controlled environment with strong, very distinct hierarchies of authority, of status, of role within that context. The armed forces, the police would perhaps be another example, maybe schools, and certainly some traditional communities. There will be forms of an institution of linking capital. And we also hear from Mark Jones at South Saron in Wrexham, where on the surface of it, his community hub, South Saron, is a hub for the Welsh-speaking community in Wrexham, but actually is investing in the bonding social capital within that, but not exclusively that.
Let's move on now to address a really fundamental challenge. Our society has not only got a pandemic with COVID-19, but also a pandemic in really an under the radar one in terms of the growth of what we call unsocial capital. And unsocial capital is anything that limits the ability of people to connect with one another, do things together, or engage with your wider community. Stuff that generates what we call an atomized society. We're increasingly living in individual cells, where it's a me approach to the world rather than a we approach. And really there's some sort of key drivers that are building this thing of unsocial capital. Surprisingly, the first one is actually anything that makes makes life more comfortable or convenient or self-indulgent. We've got an image there of a curry, and I love my curry. And it's great that I can ring up and get a curry delivered to my door. But that's brilliant for convenience, but there's a cost to social capital. It's an ingredient of unsocial capital. By having a takeaway curry delivered to my door, it means that I'm not getting out in the street, not getting out in my community, not having chance encounters with people, friends, neighbours, or other people in the community. My presence there in terms of maybe deterring potential crime or antisocial behaviour, or even seeing the guys in the curry restaurant. So again, getting to know people, a wider sense of community. So anything that makes life convenient, and Putnam highlighted how the advent of television, motorcar, suburban living have all been ingredients in changing levels of social capital. And secondly, the other big challenge we face is that we're increasingly getting less tolerant of ambiguity. So as a result, we don't talk about declining levels of social capital, we talk about changing levels of social capital. So on the one hand, we're getting increasingly well connected with people like us, the PLUs. They might share our interests, social background, and outlook on the world. And yet at the same time, we're massive decline, not only just in taking part in bowling teams, but connect with activities that connect us with people unlike us. And so the challenge we have is that we're getting a world where whatever easiest rules, and we're getting less tolerant of stuff that's unfamiliar, that is not immediately aligned with us. So as I say, we're witnessing, say, whereas before you might have been part of a football team or a group, a bowling team, or what, a skills team. Now it's about like going to the gym that's more convenient, centered around you, and perfectly tailored for you, but at a cost of your wider engagement. The milkman, which curiously, or milk delivery, even though it's something a service delivered at home, is less convenient than having to pick it up when you're at the supermarket, because you've got to manage the service, inform the milk delivery when you're going to be away, or so on, and so therefore can be seen as more inconvenient. And even something as basic as the old-fashioned two-finger salute has been replaced by the one finger. So a metaphor there that we know we're increasingly in a world that's, as I say, it's more comfortable, convenient, but comes at the cost of being less connected, less enmeshed with our wider society, a wider community. Moving on, we'll see that the challenge underpinning the decline in social capital is what we call the Meat Loaf effect. And the Meat Loaf effect is that if any purchase you make, moving on, it involves a sort of everything is political. If you spend £5 in a supermarket, that's £5 you could have spent in a local shop. And when we make decisions, moving on, that there's a triangle really of what's called any job has three dimensions of cost, quality, and speed. I remember when I began my career early on as a public relations executive and visiting a printer whose first words to me was, "I hate people from PR agencies." And I said, "Why is that, Eric?" He said, "Well, any print job involves three dimensions: cost, its quality, and its speed. And you can't have all three. You can only have two out of three. So it can be, if it's a low cost, it's going to come at the expense of quality or speed, or high quality is going to come at the expense of cost or speed, or if it's fast, it's going to come at the expense of quality. You can't have, at best you can have two, but not all three. And really, I think Meat Loaf's mantra of two out of three ain't bad is a good reference for whenever we make a decision, because if you want something to have value to your community, it's a cost. It might be more or less convenient, like the milk delivery, or the quality that is not so easy and comfortable as having my curry delivered at home. So really, it's decreasing tolerance of ambiguity, of convenience, is a major driver, curiously, for unsocial capital. And as I say, we've increasingly got to become more pragmatic and evaluate that two out of three in making decisions. That if you're trying to get everything convenient to you, social capital is the cost. Moving on, we move that actually smart use of social capital in terms of earning trust. As I say, you can't tell someone to trust you, you've got to earn it. And also in generating wider resources that are untapped within our communities. Major travesties, disasters like, say, the Grenfell Tower, had witnessed a phenomenal response in people coming together. COVID-19, we've witnessed a phenomenal response. People just going beyond clapping together to doing things, being more mindful of others in their community. And if we treat people as a person bite, so your capacity is a person bite, obviously the more person bites we can connect with, the more power and potential we've got to deliver new activities, a greater resource, greater riser. And really, that actually underpinning our ability to respond to our world is our narrative, our story. And social capital, smarter use of, can create new, more powerful narratives for change. And by building upon existing assets and capabilities, being driven from the bottom up, emergent from its environment, is a much more powerful foundations for more resilient, sustainable communities. And that by building a capacity of change makers within a community, the people who do things, people who start the action, people who provoke the change, the more we can grow a powerful resource for change. So by being smarter about social capital, we can actually create the great change we want to see in the world of a more resilient, more vibrant, sustainable, more caring, more tolerant society. And so moving on, that as I say, um, by stimulating bottom-up change, establishing not just behaviour but new social norms, and harnessing the tacit stuff, the stuff that's not written down, the stuff that is implicit from being with people within their communities, we can actually create the nudge the changes to go forward. And if you want to inspire people for change, the most inspirational people are the people around you, your friends, neighbours, others in your network. If they can do it, so can you. And we very much recognise that actually there's a growing recognition that all of us have a social purpose. I do a lot of PR award industry judging, and one of my favourite campaigns of recent years was from Bisto, the gravy granule. So if gravy granules can have a social mission, like their campaign on Spare Chair Sunday, where they teamed up with charities dealing with the elderly, that sadly a significant number of people, particularly elderly people, eat alone. So as a gravy manufacturer, they launched this initiative, Spare Chair Sunday, to tackle an issue. So if gravy granules can have a social mission, what's yours? And so really with social capital, smarter use of it, we can deepen your social purpose, sense of being who you are, and your significance and meaning in the wider world. So moving on there, I think that we've got a lesson that all of us can take part and grow forward. So Russell, I mean, what further actions can people do here?
So as part of Social Capital Week, we have got a range of activities, talks, mainly online because of the wider context we still find ourselves in, of course. But there's a range of things to join, but there's also some reading that we can suggest. And if you look at that website or zap that QR code, it'll take you to the same destination. There are some articles from newspapers, from journals. There's some more academic reading on the topic of social capital. There's some stuff that's a little bit more casual and a bit more accessible as well. And we continue to update that as and when we find things that grab our interest. But we also said we're looking at social capital in place, in the context of place, for example, within community hubs, within prisons. I'm delivering a talk for Wizard at Cardiff University this week, looking at community organisations and quite how powerful they are in generating and incubating social capital in communities, as well as a range of other benefits that they bring. We are looking at quite a radical take on communications and PR, aren't we, Andy? With some people.
We've got representatives from Extinction Rebellion, people involved in that campaigns who've inspired other movements like Black Lives Matter. And it's a different way of engaging, communicating, and frankly, where we need to be smarter about and embrace and engage to create the change we want.
Yeah.
And on Friday, we've got the first of our Tumblr schools, haven't we, Russell?
Yeah, so we're pleased to have Sophie Howe who is the Future Generations Commissioner for Wales, and the only role of her kind in the entire world. And she's going to be joining us to provide a flavour and a bit of insight into what being a change maker means to her, and in that role as well. Do you want to explain, Andy, what the term tumbler
Tumbler, so
means?
it's a word with Yiddish origins. So imagine you've got a party, you've got the music, you've got the dance floor, you've got the people, the drink and food, but no one's dancing. So a tumbler is someone who's hired to get the party going. And really, that's what our work is in social capital. How can we get a wider party going in terms of creating change, making communities stronger together, to make the world a more caring, tolerant, and vibrant place? So, yeah, so Tumblr School, really looking forward to that one, Russell.
Yeah, so we're launching, it's the first one. It's rounding off Social Capital Week on the Friday, lunchtime at 12 o'clock, and it will then become a monthly online event where we will have somebody.
Yeah, so sorry, Russell. It's the last Friday of the lunchtime Friday every month.
Yeah, and at each one we will announce, or the end of each one we'll announce who the Tumblr, the speaker at our Tumblr School is going to be for the following month. And we've got some really inspiring people lined up. So can't wait to tell you more about that. But as I said, feel free to get in touch at any point during the week and afterwards. These are our contact details. You can also email us at hello@growsocialcapital.org.uk. By the time this is on the website, there is no point clicking on that QR code on the left, because the Social Capital Week will have come to an end, but feel free to get in touch. And we can have a conversation about how we can help do some of the things that Andy's talked about: deepening your social purpose, establishing some new norms, and the rest. Anything to say, Andy?
Really, just always say to people at any end of any meeting, the 3 actions. The first is like give us feedback about, is anything we think we should be doing different, better, more to advance this mission of spreading the cause of positive use of social capital. Secondly, spread the word about social capital and any activities and anything we're doing as well. And thirdly, reflect about what next steps you can take, and please get in touch with us. We'll gladly have help discuss, chat, explore how we can help you advance your social capital mission.
So thank you. That was our primer on social capital, everything you needed to know, but we're afraid to ask. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr.